Welcome to SkadBytes, a podcast from Skadden, exploring the latest developments shaping today's rapidly evolving tech landscape. Join host Deborah Kirk and colleagues as they deliver concise insights on the pressing regulatory issues that matter to tech businesses, investors, and industry leaders worldwide.
Hello, everyone. My name is Deborah Kirk, and welcome to the inaugural episode of SkadBytes, where we talk about the intersection between tech innovation and tech regulation. We're really excited to be launching this podcast. We'll touch on poignant topics in the tech space, but we are also going to help you out with a bit of jargon busting with our bites, which will be shorter versions of our podcast, giving you a 1 to 2 minute snippet to introduce you to some of the lesser understood phrases and concepts in the tech world. I am joined by Jonathan Stephenson and Ali Ho from our IP and tech team at Skadden here in London, and we are halfway through 2025, and what a year it has been in terms of developments in tech reg so far, both from a legislative and enforcement point of view. So at the start of 2025, we reached out to our clients and identified 5 key emerging tech trends that we thought they should keep their eyes on in 2025. So time flies when you're having fun, and unbelievably, it is now already mid-2025. We've just had Tech Week and the AI Summit in London. So a great time to launch a podcast about tech, but also a great time to reflect on where we are with these themes and were we right? So Jonathan, what do you think?
Absolutely, Deb. I think, where do we start? I think, firstly, looking at the first topic, we expected that there would be a robust return to equity fundraising. And let's face it, a lot's happened so far this year in 2025 already. But we are seeing some really positive new music. We identified a shift from alternative funding to equity raises. And in Q1 of this year, we've definitely followed the same approach. In the UK, fintech giants like Revolut maintained their 45 billion valuation, and Zopa, which achieved unicorn status with a 80 million raise, are really leading the charge. The AI sector is also booming globally, with players like Databricks setting the pace, while UK startups like Luminance secured $75 million. As reinforced in London Tech Week that we all attended, the UK government is really keen to make the UK an investor-friendly environment.
And I think just turning to IPOs and the IPO space, I think it's fair to say it's been a challenging couple of years there, but there's still definitely a lot of interesting activity. One that comes to mind is Monzo eyeing up a London IPO. As you mentioned, London Tech Week, listening to speakers there, Jensen Huang and Keir Starmer, they announced a 1.5 billion investment by the UK's first sovereign AI industry forum. So looking at boosting UK domestic computing capabilities by 20 times. So I think looking at the IPO market, we can definitely expect an increase in equity fundraising activity in the UK AI space.
Sounds good. Thank you. So 1 down. Number 2, our second top tech topic for 2025. You can't say that too quickly. We anticipated continued developments around tech regulation in general in the EU with a lighter touch approach in the UK. Now, I would say that this is continuing directionally to unfold to an extent as signalled, but I guess with a few surprises on the way. So from an EU perspective, the Product Liability Directive came into force in December last year. Now that imposes strict liability for defective products, but crucially for us, expanding its scope to include software and digital systems. Jonathan, perhaps give us your thoughts on that.
And I think what's been especially interesting is to see the change of tone coming from the EU. I think the European Commission, as we've seen, they've withdrawn the AI Liability Directive in February of this year. And this can potentially coincidentally, potentially not, after US Vice President J.D. Vance, as well as France's President Emmanuel Macron, made those really insightful comments and newsworthy comments in the Feb 2025 AI Action Summit in Paris. And that was very much about bolstering innovation and relaxing regulation. I think it's an interesting quote I have here from J.D. Vance, where he said, "We need international regulatory regimes that foster the creation of AI technology rather than strangling it." So there's an interesting takeaway there.
Perhaps less coincidence, right?
Less coincidence, potentially. And I think also, we've just seen from the EU that they've signalled a really much more measured approach, even in relation to existing regulation like data protection, which are well tested and tried with revisions to the UK, with revisions to the GDPR requirements that really ease the burdens on SMEs in relation to the papering requirements there, and the withdrawal of the plans to amend the e-privacy directive, which we fondly known as PECA. On the whole, this is just a steady move towards a more business-friendly application while still trying to uphold those core privacy principles.
However, in the UK, right?
I think in the UK and in Europe more generally, and I think what we've seen is that some bodies of regulation really are presenting as very challenging to our clients. And that's due to a lack of clear regulatory approach towards both compliance and enforcement. What immediately comes to mind is the Data Act, the incoming Data Act from the EU's April 2025 guidelines. And the key question there is whether product redesign is required or not. And that remains unclear, and we're keenly watching on our side.
And I think just to add on that, when we're talking to clients about, these implementation timelines and sort of how they're thinking about it, there's also clear that there's quite a lot of overlap between these regulations. And I think that continues to be a challenge. What do I look for? What do I comply with? And rather than look at something sort of act by act, sort of taking that holistic approach. So thinking, for example, Digital Networks Act and Cyber Resilience Act, there's quite a lot of overlap there. And clients are coming to us and we've been helping them sort of heat map that. So work out, what actually impacts them when it comes into effect and what they should be looking at right now. And they've been finding that really useful just, to take a holistic approach and a really practical approach to navigating that compliance journey.
And also, I guess, how that impacts the way that different teams work together, because there's so much overlap between these regulations that we need to encourage our clients to encourage their teams to talk to one another so that they're aligned in their approach. And that's right.
Yeah, exactly. I think governance is a central theme throughout all this, right? When you're looking at any act, governance is key.
And I think again, just such a massive topic for our clients, talking about between them actually benchmarking and seeing how others are doing things seems to be a really useful tool. And actually, the EU Cyber Resilience Act is an interesting one that came into force in December last year. And it's another critical piece of legislation setting out mandatory cybersecurity requirements for hardware and software products. And so then in the UK, we forecasted, a lighter regulatory approach. And I think that has also held. But of course, we're going to need to keep an eye on how the government implements and enforces the proposed cybersecurity reforms under the Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill. But either way, it certainly looks like both the UK and the EU are dedicated to the theme of cybersecurity-focused regulation, perhaps in a way they aren't elsewhere. So, I think perhaps a key tech trend for the rest of 2025 and beyond. So, Jonathan, Ali, any more thoughts on that one?
I mean, just to echo that, I think when it's a focus of the UK government, right, it's then a focus in relation to companies and their IP and tech strategy when they're looking at, as you mentioned, governance and compliance. So sort of thinking about compliance, that takes us to our next theme, which was proactive compliance. So what's the update on that kind of proactive compliance?
Yeah, so I think our theme was, I guess, this idea of regulators encouraging conversations, so taking the more kind of preventative rather than curative approach. And I think there's been some sort of nervousness about that, as you would expect, which is, we don't want to air our dirty laundry. But I think where this can be beneficial is having the conversation with the regulator. Do I take route A or B? I've got a choice here from a sort of tech build point of view. And having that conversation early on, I think, has the benefit of reducing compliance risk, right? So we've seen the UK ICO leading with these sort of non-punitive audits to help businesses identify those compliance gaps in advance under applicable data protection legislation, again, in order to try and, reduce the amount of enforcement actions. But Jonathan, any examples of how we've actually seen this play out in industry?
Yeah, exactly. And as you say, it's a two-way street between both businesses and regulators. And what immediately jumps to mind is how Google rolled out Google Gemini as a product, which was a really proactive, ongoing communication with multiple data protection authorities all over Europe where they plan to implement that product, which worked really well for the proactive approach. looking at the flip side, regulators have really taken organizations' level of cooperation into account in those bad case scenarios where they're issuing fines. For example, the relatively recent €45 million fine imposed on Vodafone in Germany for kind of GDPR non-compliance. One of the key factors in terms of the final fine issued was their good cooperation, which was a real takeaway from there. So we're seeing things both at the very start of a product lifecycle, as well as slightly closer towards the end in like standout circumstances.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that is the message being pushed by both regulators and companies, right, is that collaboration. But I still think underlying that, there's a word of caution, perhaps, because whilst cooperation is encouraged, I don't think it's a guarantee. We've definitely seen that fines remain significant, even with that cooperation element. Of course, depending on the fine. I mean, for example, there was a recent Meta Platforms Ireland case. The Irish regulator fined Meta €251 million for data protection breaches. International data transfers, I think, continue to be, facing increased scrutiny, increased fines. Just in May, Irish GPC hit TikTok with a €530 million fine for data transfers to China. So whilst collaboration is a message, and definitely, for example, London's Tech Week, Keir Starmer was very much saying he was there to listen to the companies and sort of work out what they should do together. There's still that sort of underlying message that you still have to be cautious when you're looking at your compliance.
Interesting. Okay, so perhaps a move towards our prediction, but it's a journey.
Exactly.
Okay, so looking now to AI, which is, as we know, the topic on everyone's lips and was certainly the topic of Tech Week. I think our prediction was that we see 2025 as being, really the next chapter for AI. How is that prediction faring, Ali?
I think the regulatory approach to AI has developed largely as people expected. There's been a few twists in there, but it's rapidly evolving as you'd expect, right? So from an EU perspective, there's been quite a lot of changes. The AI Liability Directive was dropped, but significant development was the revised Product Liability Directive. So as you mentioned earlier, there's strict liability for defective AI products. And that's really seen a push for companies to integrate privacy-preserving techniques like federated learning into their IP frameworks to avoid this sort of more strict liability regime.
Yeah. And I guess looking at the UK, our forecast of a more sector-specific, principles-based approach also, I think, looks to have been fairly on the money with, I guess, regulation, as you'd expect, because there isn't a sort of AI office in the way that there is in the EU. That sector-specific regulator role is very much playing out. So the ICO and the CMA. And I've got a stat for you here. So we heard recently from the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, Peter Kyle, that 213 communities so far have applied to be UK AI growth zones, which I guess is a positive step forward, right?
Definitely.
The UK is more focused on sector approach, right? But we have seen a few pieces of regulation come through, or at least proposed. So one that comes to mind was those UK government proposals around AI and copyright regulations. So mirroring much of what the EU text and data mining exceptions say. And that's caused a lot of discussion, some would say even controversy, with Elton John and other celebrities getting involved. So I think it's something that we're watching very closely, these few pieces of UK regulation.
Yeah, he's very mad about it, as you will see if you look at his video on the BBC News site.
Exactly.
All right, so last one, Jonathan. Power sources enabling innovative technology will grow in importance both from a commercial and regulatory perspective. Sustainable powering of technology. Where are we and were we right?
Yeah, I have to say this fifth topic is my favorite one because it's very much about what powers all of these changes, right? And that we essentially thought that what we needed was sustainably powered technology continuing to evolve. And just to recap, we've already foresaw, and I think we were right on this one, innovative solutions from Europe in relation to the capacity crisis, such as increasing energy efficiency in data centers and expanding edge computing. And the EU's already delivering with about, from memory, 1.2 billion euros invested in high-efficient data centers. They're also cutting consumption by about 20% in countries such as Germany. And that is a significant public push, and I think we should call it that. But as anticipated, it pales in comparison in relation to the colossal private investment that we're seeing from tech giants, principally driven by AI demand In 2025 alone, we've seen from Microsoft that they've earmarked around $80 billion for AI-enabled data centers globally, and NVIDIA partnering with some French firms to build Europe's largest AI data center in France, valued at around 8.5 billion euros. From an edge computing perspective, those deployments have surged by about 30%, probably as expected, and that's backed by some guidance, being the draft cloud development framework, which is looking to be finalized in the final quarter of this year. So there's just a lot of activity and necessary activity, really, to provide that foundational base for this growth.
Right. And in terms of, I guess, energy sources to power the technology, we've seen the UK approve 2 small modular nuclear reactors early this year, I think in April, committing £14 billion of government investment in the Sizewell C nuclear plant. And these are big steps towards supporting tech infrastructure and aligning with the UK's net zero 2050 goals. And then we've got Gaia-X's addition of 50 partners in 2025 to enhance, resource sharing, as I think we also predicted.
And it's not just sustainable; it's also sort of huge importance, to from a commercial perspective, right? So they're creating more commercial opportunities for our clients. It's seen a 15% spike in tech M&A, sorry. So whilst regulatory fragmentation sort of remains a hurdle, we do expect that deal-making growth to continue.
Right, exactly. And just to build on that, I guess it's been interesting to see the interplay between, the massive private sector investment in the digital infrastructure, like the data center spending we've just discussed from Microsoft and NVIDIA, versus the more targeted public initiatives from the EU. Brings to mind what Mistral CEO Arthur Mensch touched on at London Tech Week, that the actual infrastructure needed to support the AI and the EU's digital decade ambitions is not where it could be.
Precisely, and that's the point, right? That's the really interesting takeaway in terms of the blend between both political and just the technological drivers behind all of this, the realities of what we're living in 2025 and onwards. It definitely highlights a degree of tension or inconsistency between some of the more ambitious policies. You've noted the digital decade, we've got the competitive compass, there's other strategies in place being set, and the practical realities of what can be done and what can be done within the intended timelines.
That being said, it's not all challenges, right? There's these strategies and there's sort of a lot of uncertainty about what can be achieved, but you've really seen regulators get behind their strategies and sort of that collaboration, as we mentioned earlier, not just to say this is a strategy, please do it and do it compliantly, but to say, what can we be doing to support businesses innovate compliantly? So as we mentioned earlier, there's definitely an increase in sandboxes. UK government announced a new digital sandbox initiative. The FCA announced that they'll launch a supercharged sandbox initiative to help firms sort of experiment safely with AI and, again, support innovation. So all these are sort of fantastic steps towards innovation, securing collaboration, and basically making it a nice environment to advance and innovate.
Right. And I think that's the message, right? That there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on, both from a sort of government point of view. Practically, we've seen sort of movement on enforcement, but I guess on the regulatory piece, that remains an ever-evolving, moving feast. So it's not always important to be right. But Jonathan, wrapping things up, how did our predictions hold up in 2025 so far?
We're exactly right. So here's the prediction.
Always.
Our analysis at the start of the year, for the moment, is holding strong, which is great. That's exactly what industry stakeholders and leaders expected to be happening. And there have been some hiccups for sure. There's been the developments, there's been opportunities, but they are continuing to shape the IP and tech landscape as we move throughout the year in generally the direction that we'd anticipated, from fundraising to sustainable tech. What we're seeing is growth. We're seeing regulatory activity, and what we're hoping for is some genuine innovation.
Good stuff. Thank you very much, Jonathan and Ali. We are the IP and tech team at Skadden, and we are here to guide you through your tech, IP and data challenges to keep you tech savvy and identify and manage your tech risks on your transactions. Thank you for joining us. Do join us on our next episode, where we dive into the case on every AI and IP lawyer's watch list, which is the Getty and Stability AI case. And look out for our bites in the meantime.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of SkadBytes. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe in your favourite podcast app so you don't miss any future conversations. Additional information about Skadden can be found at skadden.com.